Let's dive right into this explainer of our source material by speaking directly to that silent, totally exhausting moment when every consoling lie in your life has finally been stripped away. You know, there's a hunger that just doesn't want food and a wound that really doesn't want healing. Our text calls this the seduction of melancholy. And the thing is, it doesn't arrive as a sickness. No, it hits you as a sudden, piercing clarity.
So, if you're struggling with a painful loss of faith right now, whether that's religious, personal, or professional, I want you to ask yourself a pretty radical question. What happens when the whole architecture of hope just collapses? We're going to explore how giving up hope, completely surrendering the demand that life makes sense, might actually be your very first step toward genuine peace. Because what's left when that architecture falls isn't just despair. It's a strange, terrible steadiness. You find a floor beneath the floor. Think about the exhausting striving of the traditional hero, right? We're all familiar with it. They're promised to return to the light, they slay the dragon, and they earn their triumph through purposeful suffering. But contrast that with a figure who's going to be our mythic guide today, the Dark Sage. The Dark Sage inherits absolutely no such promise. He just walks right past the unlocked, totally empty gates of optimism. He chooses lucid resignation over redemptive striving. He simply stops pretending. To really understand this figure, we have to look at your melancholy completely differently. Not as a disease to be cured, but as a vast, shadowed country that needs to be explored. And we're going to map this territory together by descending a metaphorical three-step stair. Each step reveals a different historical era, a different mask worn by the Dark Sage, and honestly, a deeper level of profound, liberating truth.
All right, let's step down onto the first stair, the sacred vanity.
This descent builds a quiet counter-tradition running right beneath the loud, triumphant history of human civilization. We're plotting out our anti-hero's downward journey here. We start way back in the biblical era, descend into the existential dread of the 19th century, and finally arrive at 20th century nihilism. 3 ages, 3 distinct tongues, but one beautifully bleak descent.
So, in the oldest mask, speaking through the biblical preacher Koheleth, who you might know better as Ecclesiastes, down in Jerusalem, the Dark Sage recognizes the cruel arithmetic of the sun. He looks around and realizes a terrifying truth. The wise man and the fool, they die precisely the same way. The Hebrew word used here is hevel, meaning vapor or vanity. It's this heavy realization that your righteousness purchases absolutely no exemption from the grave. A full life and an empty one are weighed on the exact same scale by a totally indifferent hand. And it's fascinating because Ecclesiastes just dismantles the house of cosmic fairness, plank by plank. While the traditional Deuteronomistic promise told people, hey, obey the rules and you'll be rewarded with a long life and a good harvest, Koheleth's diagnosis shatters that entirely. The exact same wages are paid in the exact same coin, completely regardless of your moral ledger. This text shows us that wisdom's true gain isn't power or some favorable audit in heaven. It's simply the ability to look at life without flinching. Moving down to stair number 2, anxious freedom. Here, the melancholy sheds its scripture and puts on dread. The existential sage turns inward. Think of Kierkegaard's Night of Despair. He discovers angst, that profound, deep dread right before the abyss of freedom. Because the grand cosmic ledger is empty, there is no authority left to certify which path is the wise one. Freedom arrives, but definitely not as a glorious prize. It's an infinite, unshared burden that you have to either carry or drop. Now, if you try to drop that burden, you fall into what Sartre called mauvaise foi, or bad faith. This is basically the flight from the anguish of freedom. It happens when you decide to just adopt a borrowed, ready-made self handed to you by the crowd, letting someone else's script speak in your voice. But the purifying fire of the second stage burns away that comfortable fiction, leaving only the bare, trembling individual who utterly refuses to live a lie. So unlike the traditional hero who rushes outwards, sword in hands, for a literal crown, the existential Dark Sage, kind of like Nietzsche's solitary free spirit, finds a bruised private dignity by facing this internal monster. The realization that you are entirely responsible for your own self-authorship without a heroic narrative from your nation or tribe to lean on, it's a terrifying chamber to walk through. But it's absolutely necessary to forge true authenticity. And that brings us to the bottom landing, stair number 3, the peaceful void. Down here, even the exhausting burden of self-creation is finally set down. Through the lens of Schopenhauer's cosmic pessimism and Zappe's diagnosis of human consciousness as an evolutionary accident, the sage achieves teleologia deposita. That's a beautiful Latin phrase for the laid-down teleology of the nihilist. It literally means surrendering the assumption that existence is moving toward anything at all. The sage realizes the universe was never withholding meaning from him. It simply never had any to give in the first place. And here's the wild part. This discovery doesn't wound you. It actually exhales. The sage looks at the old heroic quests, the dragon, the trials, the epic meaning, and sees it exposed as a child's theater, staged purely to keep the audience from noticing the empty house around them. Relinquishing the obligation to hope, to justify, to redeem, it offers the incredible allure of total metaphysical disarmament. You gain a cool observational distance, where existence can finally just be watched rather than constantly fought. Let's move to our next section, the modern workplace struggle. Let's ground this whole mythic fable in a modern reality pretty much all of us know all too well: corporate burnout. These 3 masks map to it perfectly. Step 1, the sacred vanity. You diagnose the absolute unfairness. The hardest worker and the slacker get the exact same miserable layoff. Step 2, anxious freedom. You endure the dread of leaving the prescribed corporate script and facing the terrifying freedom of figuring out your own life. And step 3, the peaceful void. You finally achieve total serenity by completely disarming your need for corporate meaning. You realize the corporate ladder is pure fiction, an empty theater. You stop fighting it, and you just observe it. And finally, Section 5, Sanctuary in the Dark. We arrive now at the culmination of our descending stair. This is the ultimate punchline of this counter-tradition, and it is profoundly liberating. At the very bottom of the stair, the cold, once entered fully, isn't experienced as a punishment anymore. It's actually experienced as the roomy need to finally stand up straight. Hopelessness literally transforms. It ceases to be a terrifying absence and becomes, at long last, a solid place to stand. The dark sage earns this quiet authority nowhere else but through the willingness to pay the price that every comforting fiction quietly charges its believers. The illusion of fairness, the illusion of destined purpose, they charge you a steep toll of constant anxiety and exhaustion. By refusing to pay that toll, by stripping away the decorative lies, the silence that follows might initially be mistaken for grief, but as our source text beautifully urges us to notice, before judging it as despair, look really closely at how very much it resembles peace. I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder as you navigate your own country of melancholy. The universe owes us no explanation, and honestly, there is an incredible, profound relief in finally accepting that. So are you ready to lay down your weapons, step off the exhausting heroic stage, and find your own sanctuary in the dark? Think about it. Thanks for taking this descent with me today.